Jim has worked as a consulting knowledge engineer for various steel companies, including Bethlehem Steel, which is, of course, a local favorite of ours, Lucan Steel. Jim, you're going to have to help me with the next one. Is that DeFosco?
DeFasco.
DeFasco. Okay.
If you were Canadian, you would have known that.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. For our proud Canadian friends, we have that now. And Wheeling Pittsburgh Steel. He developed an interest in the iron and steel industry in Lebanon and Cornwall while renovating and restoring the Cornwall Company store. He is the author of Souls of Iron, which tells the remarkable story of the Coleman Iron Dynasty. The book is available right now as an ebook and will be available in hardback later this year. Jim also is currently the president of the Friends of the Cornwall Iron Furnace. So please welcome our speaker, Jim Polczynski.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I'm probably the only person that I previewed the slides with that likes the title, but the story of telling the Cornwall story at the Cornwall Iron Furnace. I know there's two stories in there, but it really is kind of a double circular helix there, because the Cornwall story is what we have been trying to tell at the Cornwall Iron Furnace ever since 1939. And this slide show that you're going to see tonight is more about the evolution. I don't think we have yet arrived, and I hope we never do arrive at having it all together with the perfect telling of the story, because I think that the fun for the community and for us especially, and me personally, is to be able to continue to learn how to tell this story better and better and understand it. So I hope that we give you a little bit of insight into what things were like through the years, how improvements were made, how our storytelling abilities evolved, and where we're headed for the future. I would like to thank, before I start, Mike Emery, who was just speaking, Karen Biazzi, Michael Trump, Irv Muritz, Sue Wenzel, and Kathy Donaldson, because they gave lots of feedback, lots of input into crafting this slideshow for you tonight. So that's why at the bottom you see Friends of Cornwall Iron Furnace. You don't see my name, because this slideshow, even though I'm giving it, is really a collaborative effort of the Friends of the Cornwall Iron Furnace. And I really appreciate the fact that you have showed up tonight to spend a little time with us. So the books here have nothing to do with the Cornwall Iron Furnace directly, but indirectly, I have them there as a reminder of when you sit down and you read a book, and I'm thinking these are all fiction books that are listed there. And they're also fiction books that are like 100 years old. So it's putting us in a context of telling the story for something that's over 100 years old. Ultimately, we try to strive for the story that we tell you, reading like a book, being engrossed in the story, just like you would if you were reading a book. Now, I know we don't always achieve that, but that is part of our goal. And Leslie Bedford is a consultant in the field of museum archival storytelling. And this, the quote there, it makes sense that storytelling is appropriate to the work of a museum, for museums are storytellers. They exist because once upon a time, some person or group believed that there was a story worth telling over and over for generations to come. And shortly, we're going to be introduced to one of the first people that thought that there was a story worth telling for generations over and over. And that's Margaret Buckingham. And we'll be seeing her in the next slide. And then just from Rudyard Kipling, if history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. And ultimately for us, history is not about memorizing facts or knowing the right dates, but really being able to tell the story over and over again. And each time it's told, it's unique and it has more gravity than the time it had before. So here she is. This is Margaret Buckingham, and she's the great-granddaughter of Robert Coleman, who was not the founder of the Cornwall Iron Furnace, but by 1800, he was the owner of the Cornwall Iron Furnace. He He and his following generations, they owned the furnace, they ran the furnace until 1883 and February 11th, when it was finally shut down by the Cornwall Iron Company. And it's interesting that a lot of the properties that were sold to Bethlehem Steel back in the 1917, 1918 timeframe became property of Bethlehem Steel, including some of the office buildings and some of the buildings still standing that you see. Others remained in the hands of the family. Some were sold to, for example, like Cornwall Manor was sold to the Methodist Church. But the Cornwall Iron Furnace remained in the family all the way into the 1930s. And the shares that were inherited from the Cornwall Iron Furnace, which were the people that owned it at that time, were descendants of the Aldens and the Derbys, which basically all from the Alden family, and also Bethlehem Cuba Iron Mines owned a little bit of the furnace. So Margaret Buckingham actually went to all these people, purchased their shares of ownership in the Cornwall Iron Furnace so that she could put that all together and give it to the state, to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Before she did that, she hired Edgar Weimer, and a lot of you might know, and maybe you don't, the Weimer Machine Works were a very big concern that was located in Lebanon, and Edgar was a descendant in that family. He had actually previously worked at the Cornwall Iron Furnace, and so he was given the job to basically bring the furnace up to a state of repairs that it could be gifted to the Commonwealth. That work took a year's worth of time. There was a staff that he had working for him, and it cost $30,000 in 1932 dollars. The gift was approved by the legislature of Pennsylvania in 1931, but it wasn't formally deeded over to the Commonwealth until 1932. So essentially, we are celebrating the 90th anniversary of the gifting of the Cornwall Iron Furnace to the state of Pennsylvania. So it's a big deal, and there'll be cake and ice cream afterwards if you just want to make it. Wish we could have it here. So in 1935, Margaret Buckingham added an additional $35,000 for maintenance, ongoing maintenance, and the state held on to that as it matured and began to accrue some interest. And so she not only donated the furnace, but she also provided some funds for getting it through the early years. In the bottom, you can't necessarily see the date, but that date there is January 8th, 1939, and it's a little image from the Lancaster Sunday News announcing that the furnace would be opening for tours that year. So the tours started at the Cornwall Iron Furnace in 1939. I'm not expecting you to read through it all, but basically, starting in 1930 and on through to the present time, some of the activities, and this is nowhere near the complete list of everything that's been done and tried at the iron furnace, but you know, with the gift from Margaret Buckingham, her passing in 1946. So can you imagine, since the tours actually started in 1939, if you had been around to do a tour of the furnace, and by the way, in 1939, it was free, you would have actually come to the furnace when Margaret Buckingham might have been in residence at the manor just above the hill, and also when the ore mines were still in operation. That's a context for how things might have looked when you came to your tour then. There were structural renovations that the Commonwealth approved in 1955 and 1956. The first visitor center in the charcoal barn opened in between 1964 and 65. And a big deal on 11/3/1966, the Cornwall Iron Furnace was designated a National Historic Landmark. There was the axe. For those of you that have toured the iron furnace, you know the wheel, the big wheel. That axle was rebuilt in 67 and motorized in 69. And then the mines closed in 73. And as we all know, part of the contributing factor there was the Agnes flood. Well, I'm not sure if that was the cause or not, but the motor had stopped working in 1972. I don't know if that's a coincidence or if there's a connection, but then it had to be repaired again, and it's been working for the most part ever since. The cast house originally did not have walkways like we have today. And in 1992, they added walkways. 2000 to 2002, we added further renovations in the visitor center and added the third bay that you currently go through for the interpretation center. Cornwall Iron Furnace, Pennsylvania Trail of History that Sue Diefenbach and Craig Benner put together was published in 2003. And as we go into the presentation, there'll be some further activity that occurred. So we just went back in time. Did you see the time warp thing there? And this is right here, a picture from around 1960. And I don't know if there were crowds that big every time there was a tour, but that's a pretty big crowd that day. And the tour at that point, what you're looking at is the door that would have gone into our engine room where the steam engine is. You would have walked in that door, gone around the corner, looked at the cast house and the stack, and then left. That was your tour at that time period. And this little building right here still stands. That was, as you know, that's where you came and registered. That was the welcome desk, if you will. So this gentleman here, Edward Patton. Now we have pictures of him, and on the pictures it's labeled Nat Patton. And so when I originally started trying to look into who Nat Patton was, I came up with a big blank and found nothing. His name is actually Edward. And apparently Mike Emery had received a contact from his, I believe, granddaughter. And to her knowledge, they never called him Nat. So I'm not sure why maybe it's because he was a sharp dresser, they called him Nat. I don't know. But there he is welcoming you for the tours, the site's first curator. And he's going to appear in a number of pictures. He was born in about 1880. And he worked at the Robizonia Iron Furnace. He worked at the Bird Coleman Iron Furnace. And in his words, Mr. Buckingham himself called him up and asked him to come work at Bird Coleman. And as he put it, he worked in every capacity at the Bird Coleman Furnace except manager. So he really understood and knew the making of iron. And I mean, it had to have been a thrill to be able to have as your tour guide somebody that had that kind of experience working in the industry itself. Apparently, he said that nobody could ever prove him wrong. And if he had to, he would go to his books and he would show you the correct information. He was probably one of the best versed people for the history of the Freemans and the Colemans that probably, ever was an amateur historian. Unfortunately, he didn't write any of it down, so we don't know what knowledge he actually did have. But that's the beginning of the tour, and we'll go in, and there he is waiting for us in the steam engine room. And if you can notice towards the center where he's standing to his left, it's blocked off. There's no walking over to the wheel room at that point. And the steam engine is not operational at this point. It's just, you can see it. There's a bunch of pictures there that we could not locate. We couldn't find those pictures, but we think they might have been drawings. We're not sure. And along the wall to his right, there are pictures of, we believe, the Bird Coleman Furnace. And it might seem natural, having worked there, that he would have some photos. We do still looks like we have a couple of those photos. And then leaning up against the bench, you see some iron plates. We'll be talking more about those iron plates again a little later. And I skipped one, I think. All right. Nope. Okay, so then you would have come around the corner to the cast furnace. Now this drawing is from 1954. And I actually went down the other day, and Mike gave me his knowledge of the lathing that is above. When you take the tour today, you look up at the ceiling, you won't see the lathing there. You'll just see the frame. And in the middle Mike pointed this out to me, is that there's like hatch marks on the wood beams that go across from north to south, and you can see one of the beams in the picture there. Well, this lathing has been taken down, but it is believed that the purpose of the lathing would have been to control the heat exposure, and the middle section would have been open to allow for ventilation, because the furnace was a very hot place to work, you know, well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is believed that the lathing probably would have been placed in the renovations that took place in the 1850s. You also can see that on the left, there's no going up behind the furnace as part of the tour. The cannon at that point in time was actually in the cast house, just sort of as it's pictured right there. So now, this is more crowds of people taking tours. You can't really see it, but down here there's a black chalkboard, and the date that's listed on there is October 26th, 1778. And over here, you see that this is actually one of the site manager at the time, John Dobbich, chief guide and caretaker. It says George Washington visited the furnace in 1778. Now, this is all very interesting, and it was brought up last month during Mike Weber's talk, but no one prior to Ed Patton had mentioned anything about George Washington being at the furnace, but many people in our community do actually believe that. There's absolutely no proof to that fact. Apparently, when Ed Patton took on the job as curator, he found a lot of notes, many of which actually are true to fact. But there was a note which says, notice, General George Washington Lafayette will be here on Monday. Now, October 26, 1776 was a Monday, to see the casting of the first cannon, historically the first date. Peter Small's manager. So everything there has got, you know, accurate information, but the only difference is George Washington was in White Plains, New York on October 28, 1776. It was the Battle of White Plains. George Washington Lafayette were nowhere near Pennsylvania at that point in time. Now, some years later, there is, in 1961, there's a news article that says it changes the date to October 26, 1778. So somewhere along the line was the date was changed, but as Mike Weber pointed out in his last article in the Ledger, there were no cannon productions at that time in 1778. We were all done with that. And again, George Washington was in New York in 1778. He wasn't anywhere near Pennsylvania. So that's the origin of the story of George Washington visiting the furnace. He couldn't have been here. And I actually think that Ed Patton would have not made it up. So somebody had a notice that they had prepared, and he found it. So how old was that notice? Who knows? But at least we kind of know the source of where that story came from. So moving forward, cast house, trying to tell the story, putting some human-like figures. To me, they actually look like they're, I don't know, some kind of sci-fi version of elves on steroid or something like that. They're kind of creepy looking in a way, but they do, you know, you see the boots, you see the aprons. The purpose here was to try to give a feeling for what the workers might have been doing, because really the story of making iron is really the story of the workers, the people that endured the smoke and the loud noises and the heat, the very physical, grueling labor. That's actually the people. That's the story of the Cornwall Iron Furnace. It's not just about the ownership and the profit and the tons made, but it really is a story of the workers. So I think this might have been an attempt to try to bring the workers into the story. Now, I'm showing these different pictures here, primarily to show you that, you know, in 1900, there was no door. It looks like there might have been something there, like a window or something previously. It's uncertain, but then you see there is a door there. And you again see Edward Patton standing in the doorway in the 1950s. But the thing that's really curious is this lower panel on the left. Do not write on the walls of this old furnace. Help to keep it as it was. And this is the good part, 1735. Well, this building is from the 1950s. And, you know, basically 1735, there wasn't even the old furnace making iron at that time. So I'm not sure who wrote that note, but I find it very, very funny that it's there. On the right panel on the lower side is a plaque. And those of you might be searching your mind right now, I've seen that plaque. Where is it? In the next slide, I'll show you. But basically, it was a plaque that was made, you know, basically just saying this is the Cornwall Iron Furnace and why it's so great. But the little sign above it is the hours of the tours that were going to be that would be available. This is where the sign is today on this big piece of iron ore that when you leave a tour and you start walking back up the steps towards the visitor center, that sign is now in attached to the ore. So this is a picture here. As I mentioned, they started working on the repairing the wheel, and this is actually in the 60s, 70s, and you know they electrified it in the 70s twice. You see like little chains or little, I don't know what, there's probably a technical term, but there's little hoists or whatever. You can see that they're putting it together to make it work. You see over here, there's a landing today where this switch right here that turns it on. You see boards stacked up here, this chain right here that's holding this up. They're putting the wheel back in operation for the electrified operation of it. Another angle of them doing that work, and you can see here that the fence is in and the little box that holds the little pinion gear is here. So this extended the tour to another room. And if you notice, there were steps being built in the previous, if maybe you noticed, there were steps being built so that the whole tour could be done, starting at the top room all the way down through and out the final door. This is our steam engine that's pretty much as it is today. You notice the date's 67 to 76. We're not sure what the exact data here is, but Mike Emery was able to at least pinpoint some of the range of dates based on these open panels here. And those of you that have toured the furnace in the last year or so, we had some work done through a grant from the state to repair some of the pieces on the furnace, make them smoother in operation. And the first tour I gave after that work was done, I was talking to our guests, and all of a sudden I heard this little poof of air, and I turned around because I had never heard that before. So since the steam engine was repaired, it actually blows off a little air when it's operating. So if you haven't been on a tour since the steam engine was repaired, it's worth doing another tour for. So in the 70s, there was a local artist by the name of Constantine Kermes, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who for the Pennsylvania Historic Museum put this little mural together. And it was basically a visual aid to tell the story of the Cornwall iron making from, you know, you see here the charcoal, that would have been the mounds that we have in our film today, the buggy for the ore and the limestone, the original bellows for the water, for the air power. You see that they're making pig iron here. They're casting molds. You see the cannonballs, cannon. And this was actually one of the plates. And that's 1752, I believe. And I'm thinking, and I can't remember, but this might have been an Amos Garrett plate, one of the people that leased the ore from Peter Grubb. But this has allowed the folks giving the talks and the tours at that time to tell the whole story and have a visual. And apparently somebody who I'm going to show you in a little bit, John Robinson, who was one of the site managers for a period, he said the kids would be able to sit down and actually, you know, he would tell the story of this. The kids kind of liked it. And this gentleman right here who's doing the casting, I guess his name was Amos. That's not written down anywhere, but that's what they call him. This is, you know, probably before Bethlehem Steel left town. we don't have an exact date on this, but this is actually when Bethlehem Steel presented the mineral display, not to the furnace, but to the state. So the state originally allowed this to be housed here at the furnace. And I have a little diagram later on that'll show you where this was located. But if you walk into the furnace right now, I mean, into the Welcome Center, between the gift shop and the third bay, the interpretation center, is where these minerals were originally stored. Now, when work was being done to prepare for the interpretation center, these were then sent to Harrisburg. And as you know, just a few years ago, we received some of those minerals back, and they're now in our interpretation center. But Milan Lipinski at that time was he's the gentleman on the right. He was the last mine superintendent for Bethlehem Steel. And Thomas Luce on the left was the site manager. He'd been site manager for 11 years. And I'm not 100% certain, but I think he was a site manager prior to John Robinson, who you'll be seeing shortly. So John, as I just mentioned, John, he was site manager just for a very brief period of time, 1981 to 1983. But I think he was the right person for the right time. You can see he's giving a little talk there, inspiration in the background with the open doors to the charging room. He came in, the museum had actually been shut down for a couple of years when he arrived. And so one of the first things he had to do was clean it. And he just went through and can remember telling you stories, cleaning shelves and doing all these other activities. But he also would conduct tours, of the area, talking about the furnace and the community. Opened up a gift shop there. I've not been able to identify that person in the original gift shop. And he put the first interpreter's manual together along with the custodial guide here. And I apologize, I'm not reading her name properly. But when he arrived, the previous visitation in 1978, as you can see, there was 1,800. By the time he left, he had upped the annual visitors to 12,000. They did a lot of promotion and advertising. So basically, I like to think that John Robinson is the person who put us in, that transition person that put us into the age that we're now enjoying the work of not just his labor, but many people who came after. Because one of the other things that, well, I'll tell you that in a second, but this is the diagram that John put together for me, and I really thank John for doing so. And what I've done is I've got his diagram from 1981, and then these are current photos of what's in those bays right now. So the charcoal barn originally had 4 bays, and that's just 4 different areas to put the charcoal. So you would walk in to the reception area here. There'd be some book sales along this side of the wall, which is the south side, and storage and office area, which you can tell is not that much. But then the restrooms, they're about located where they are right now. They had some exhibit cases, and this little line right here was actually a wooden platform. And when John would give the talks to the kids would actually sometimes sit on the part over here. And then a gathering space, and this is where the mineral exhibit was. So this is where you walk in today, right here. This is our current gift shop, and right here would have been where the minerals were. And as you can see, that there was a furnace in here, and there was a coal heated by then, so there was a coal bin, and then they just used this third bay, which is now our interpretation center, as equipment and supply storage. And here's a picture of Gene Lehman giving a little talk to a very engrossed family in what would have been the first bay at that time. This is the 4th bay, and John's note here is funny. This bay had a dirt charcoal dust floor. The forged parts were stored in here, the forged parts being these parts right here. It was generally a mess. Now, I'm looking at that picture right now, and would you say that's still generally a mess? Not sure, but that's a funny one right there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Cornwall Iron Furnace received the Registered National Historic Landmark. 1966, it was the first historic landmark in Lebanon County. And also we've been acknowledged from the American Society for medals. They do have starting in 1734 here, though, so we'll forgive them. They gave us a plaque, and then another plaque from the mechanical engineering group. And this is all three of these can be read as soon as you walk in from the front doors into the welcome center on the right-hand side. Now, this is a little help from our friends, and this is really, I mean, I could have filled up, I don't know, 10, 20 slides with names. So I just tried to pull in some of the names that have made such a big difference through the years. This is a photo of the original charter, and this was from 1984. Look how many people, you can't tell who they all are, signed up to basically say, we really believe in this this furnace and its purpose in this community, and how important this is to us. That lots of people. And I do want to say there's one person on this list who is currently still involved and a board member, and that's Mike Trump. So Mike Trump has been was a charter member and is still on our board, very faithfully serving us. Then there's people that you might remember: Sue Diefenbach, known better as Mrs. Buckingham. Some of the photos that were taken by Jay Angelo. Nancy Ladd, Maxine Cougar, for years and years and years on the board. Tim Neiman is still on. Karen Biazzi, who's been the furnace has been so lucky to have her. I could go on and say something about all these names, but I do want to say one thing about this one name right here, Carol Christ. Now, I am grateful to Carol. She actually invited me to come on the board and asked me to be president. And at the time, I wasn't sure if I could handle that activity or not, but I am so glad I have. And she did this job for almost 25 years. She became president a year after, oh, by the way, Irv Muris and Carol were from the same, they joined the board at the same time. And Irv is still on the board. Carol retired from the board, a well-deserved retirement, but she is the reason, in my opinion, and I don't want to just single one person out at the exclusion of others, but she's the reason why we can do some of the things we can do today. And so I think that all of us probably are, in our hearts, just so grateful to the work that Carol did. And so, we're just lucky to have all these group of people here. It's just amazing to be involved as a volunteer with such a wonderful group of people. That's why we can tell this story to you. That's why we can continue to evolve the story. Anyhow, back to the third bay. Third bay had to be completely cleaned up and cleared of everything. And you can see there's some crates and things being unloaded here. There was a grant that the Friends worked very hard for $115,000 from DCED, Department of Community and Economic Development, better known as DCED. They do a lot of great work in the Commonwealth. Anyhow, they got the bay ready, and these are some photos from how it looks today. And there she is, our lady who gave this all to us, Margaret Buckingham. And there's the minerals right there. I wanted to point out, I told you to pay attention to the plates. We'd come and talk about them again. See this plate right here? It's a little dirty. This plate here, sorry, this a little dirty. Look how it cleaned up. These are on display now in our interpretation center. This is the 1752 plate. I believe it's over here. I think that's the right one. This one right there, over there. So these were just leaning up against the wall. One of them made its way into the mural that was done. And now we have them in a protective area with some verbiage around each one of them telling what they are. And that is one of the things that I've noticed in putting this slide together, is that we've been able to change and go through dramatic growth, but we've just expanded on the story instead of throwing stuff away, if you will. Now, so that kind of, starting in 1984, almost 40 years. So we probably, as a Friends group, will have to do something special in a couple of years, because that'll be 40 years. The Friends of Cornwall Iron Furnace worked hard to keep the story of Cornwall Iron Furnace alive. Now, we could never do this without the kind of people we have, and I don't want to belabor that point, but we are, and here's an example of it, we're providing free and open lectures to the public. And we've been doing so for a long time. And we've been committed to doing that while there was a pandemic going on, and still is going on, via Zoom. We've been able to, through the generosity of various numbers of donations, acquire iron-specific artifacts. And there are people who just walk in once in a while and say, hey, I've got this stuff. Would you like it? And we usually say yes. At community events that I mentioned about Sue Diffenbach, she played Margaret Buckingham she portrayed Margaret Buckingham in the garden parties. We actually, May 14th we're resuming our cast iron cooking days. That started in 2011. Before the pandemic, we had our largest attendance, and it's, food and tasting and just good fun. Christmas in Cornwall, which is something that we started a couple of years ago, and the Blast, which has been done a number of years. So there are other ideas we have for events, but this is just where we are just continuing to try and come up with ideas. How do we take this story outside of just a 30-minute tour or maybe watching a movie? How do we make this story alive? And that's just something that we constantly will be trying to improve upon. And then the two Kathys, Kathy Donaldson and, oh God, where's my mind? Kathy Donaldson will have to tell us at the end, or Mike will have to remind me, but the Karen, oh God. Anyhow, Enhance the Gift Shop displays, the two people, they went through and they barcoded everything. They made a decision. They stocked the items. They're so intelligent about what to get. And, it's just incredible to look at that gift shop and the amount of work that has gone into it. And just looking for ways through Facebook and through other ways that we can reach out and let people know we're here and have something to tell them. Another way to do that is through publications, and there you can see some of the publications we've done. Mike Trump and Sue Wenzel and Kathy Donaldson have just spent hours and hours and hours bringing you the Communities of Cornwall series, and there should somewhere in the future be a third one coming up. Irv Muritz put together Elaine Ainsworth's work and put together a book that we sell at the furnace. So we are always looking for continuing to be able to try and do that. One that we're working on right now is Mike Weber, who's given, I don't know, maybe 6 or so presentations and has an incredible amount of knowledge to share. He's generously given us his book, Always More Production, which is work that he's put together by combing through the Bethlehem Steel archives, and we are currently in the process of trying to get that ready for print, and we're hoping for later this year, but it might be next year. We've been publishing our quarterly newsletter for members, the Ledger, and added color to that in 2006, and the ability to have the film, the Cornwall the Iron King, actually enhances our ability to complete that story. Because we really do, we find our visitors really, they do want to have that 30-minute experience on a tour. And we just know that there's such more great story to tell that we are looking for ways to increase that. And not just for adults, but we're also looking for ways to increase that for children. And Kathleen Donaldson especially has worked so hard on the junior collar activity book, and has done an amazing job there with everybody who she got to help work on that. Now, this is the future of what we're working on. I don't know if anybody's been to the furnace lately, but if you have, outside at the beginning of the walkway to the Welcome Center is this sign right here. You can see it installed. And we, as the furnace, went ahead and paid for this sign and put it in. Somebody shows up and they don't necessarily, we're closed. They don't know what this whole building's all about. We're hoping that we can tell some of that story to people when we're closed. Now, our ambition is to do 6 or 7 of these signs over the course of the next year or so. We've been working very hard on additional signs, and this is not the final version of the Cornwall mines, and we don't necessarily have the exact location of where we're going to put this sign, but it is just amazing work that the group has done putting this together. And then we have one that we've been working on that we're hoping to put up at the manor. And it just gives you an idea of, the history of the manor and what was there at one point in time. And you can actually still, looking around the manor, you can say, oh, that was what it looked like. So we have other signs that we're going to be working on. I'm going to tell you about one of them that's very exciting, but I want to show you some of the locations we're looking at. And this is the proposed Cornwall Manor. That's Cornwall Manor there. We're thinking the mines could go a little bit south of where the furnace is, the furnace one that's installed here. We're talking about three signs along the rail trail. Two of them that might be down the trail a little bit. One dealing with the furnaces, showing the multiple furnaces that were in the area, and then one talking about the different mansions. And there were many of the mansions in the Cornwall area. The one that I'm going to show you next that we have been working with Jared Blouck, who gave a talk part one of last year on the Lebanon schools, and we'll be hearing part two later this year from him. He has spent many hours than any of us could even imagine, but he has put together something tremendous that I'm going to be happy to show you. But we're looking to have a three-sided sign at the trailhead that is going to be different than what's already been put there, so that we don't duplicate anything that's already there. But we want to try and cover the different villages, and we want to share information about the workers, because I said earlier, it's really, we want to try and continue to tell the worker story. That's part of what we're moving towards as we go forward. This is a prototype of what Jared has been working on, and you can see this might look very busy to you right now, but when you see it blown up actual size, there's a lot of information on here. It gives information about the villages, about the furnaces and forges, the office buildings that were there, the commercial businesses. And this is mostly historic, schools, bodies of water, railroad stations, and you'll be able to look at, the general location of them. But if you have a smartphone, you'll be able to take a picture of this QR code, which is a quick response code, and that basically will take you to an application or a URL on your smartphone that you'll be able to walk around. And these are just some of the icons. You can see the schoolhouses here, and you'll be able to say, oh, I want to see where the furnaces were. And you'll be able to walk around, and you'll be able to get old images and text about those particular little icons, is what our vision is. So that brings us to our last slide, and basically for success. And I think that we have historically, since 1939, or actually since 1932, Commonwealth and PHC staff and volunteers and community have all pulled together, and that equals success. And that's the formula that we want to continue to grow and hold dear. We believe that's our formula at the Cornwall Iron Furnace for success. And it's kind of like we to do that, we're putting the pieces of a puzzle together, however primitive this puzzle might look. But tours, and again, I put our original curator here, but we have a number of volunteers that give tours on a regular basis, and we're very blessed to have so many people interested in doing tours. And the artifacts that we have, I mean, we have a whole room of them and more. If you haven't been to our interpretive center, it's just amazing to see everything we have. And then events, this is a picture of 2019's cast iron cooking, and which we will have again, as I mentioned, on May 4th. And then our ledger, and I included this issue of the ledger because I think it sparks somewhat of what we are moving forward to. I don't know if you read the From Russia with Love series that Pat Freeland had put together. I don't have time to go into that story, but I believe there's a link on the website that for that, but it is a story just of somebody, one person, and their family, and how they came from Russia and their experience in Cornwall. It's a very rich, personal, human story, and I know that that's what we want to tell more of. And so this final quote here: museums are often thought of as places that collect, care for, display, and interpret objects. While valid in many ways, and we are grateful, I'm putting this in parenthetically, and we are grateful to have them, this view omits the human element of museums. An alternative approach, or I would say it as an expanded approach, is to think of museums as places that collate and share human experiences. And that's a quote by Anna Faraday. And I do believe, in combination with everything else we're doing, we want to have a backdrop of collating and sharing human experiences to basically propel the story that we want to continue to tell and improve for the next generations that come to see the Cornwall Iron Furnace. And with that, I'm done. So I really appreciate you attending tonight. I hope that you got something enjoyable from it.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. If anyone else has questions, if you can go ahead and type those into the Q&A. So this is a question from Dan Snyder. This is going back to the beginning of the talk, where you had spoken about that Margaret Buckingham had gone and had spent, what was it, $30,000 or $35,000 fixing up the furnace before handing it over to the Commonwealth. Do you know what types of repairs were needed before that was gifted over to the state?
Okay, so $30,000 was the initial, and then a $35,000 in 1935 to help as a trust for it. There were the walk shed between the charcoal house and the charging room had to be repaired. There was some pointing and some other woodwork that had to be done, but there was a lot of work that was done in the cast house itself, and I'm glad this question was brought up. They dug like 3 feet down from the ground that was in the casting house at that time, and that's when they found a lot of tools, and they found some cannonballs. They found a bunch of artifacts like 3 feet down under the ground, and so somebody had to dig all that hard ground, and they had to pull that out. Now, so that was just some of the work that had to be done.
Jim, I know I can also answer a little bit of this. It wasn't more than probably a month and a half ago, Karen Biazzi showed myself and Bruce Chadbourne a box of audio tapes. And some of them were oral histories that were done 30 years ago. And one of the gentlemen who was on that audio tape actually did work for Mrs. Buckingham in the furnace. He worked for Mr. Weimer. And one of the things that he talked about is that all of the piping that goes from the blowing tubs into the furnace, that was all something that they made. They installed that under Weimer, because I guess either what was there was not complete, was in bad condition, but that was something that was put in by Weimer in the 30s before that went over to the Commonwealth.
Cool.
Yeah, but that was a great piece from an oral history that otherwise, we wouldn't have known. So.
Oh, by the way, before I don't know if you have any others, but I
stumbled
through the one where I was talking about the gift shop, and I credited Kathy Donaldson for working so hard on getting our gifts here. It's Karen Mitchell, who also spent tens and tens and tens and hundreds of hours getting our gift shop to where it is now.
Yes. Oh, and Bruce Chadbourne wrote in that interview that I just spoke of was with Lester Carpenter.
Oh, cool.
So thank you very much, Bruce. So another question from Dan Snyder. He asked whether the Constantine Kermes illustrated panel still exists.
We went looking the other day and we didn't find it.
Right. So I think that was something that even though he was an artist and had worked for, I believe, what was at times Sperry, New Holland, doing illustrative work, and he lived down directly across from Landis Valley. Matter of fact, he's buried in the Landis Valley Cemetery. But I think that that was just seen as an old piece of exhibitry, and I think that was discarded. So I've never seen it any other place except for in photographs. So, all right, we have another question here, and this is from Mike Weber, and his question is actually about this photograph. He says, your opening and closing photos show a third building immediately behind the charcoal barn. Any insights about what this building was?
Well, that's funny. We were talking about that while we were waiting for opening up to the audience. It's believed that was a covering over the roasting oven.
All right. Yes, I thought that was funny when I saw that. So that was good timing. So here's a question from Terrence Boyer. Where did the charcoal get processed? In Cornwall, or was it transported from somewhere else?
Well, most of the charcoal, the lands that were owned by the Colemans at that time were like 10,000 acres, and they all, that included Mount Gretna. And I'm sure maybe you've heard the name Governor Dick. And there were many they were essentially subcontractors that out in the woods usually had charcoal that they made 3 or 4 or 5 different locations, and they had young helpers. And so they would make the charcoal out in the surrounding woods, and then they would load it in on the teamsters would bring it into the charcoal bin and the bays, and they would dump the charcoal in there.
Okay. And I think in the later days, Jim, I think there's some records even, I mean, the real latter days of the furnace, when there was much more difficulty getting charcoal. That charcoal was actually coming in by locomotive that they were bringing.
Yeah, they had to reach out to other sources eventually, and that's, if you know that down by Birdsboro, down by Reading, there was a furnace, and I don't remember the name of it, that went out of business because they ran out of trees. Yeah, and that's actually why England adopted coke so quickly versus over in this country, because they actually had a law they couldn't continue to cut down trees to make charcoal, so they had to convert to coke. Yeah, you're right. There were other shipments that were brought in from out of the area eventually because we just didn't have the wood to make the charcoal anymore. Right. So that railroad really did save the operation for some time, because the cheap transportation is what made something like that possible. So have more of a statement from John Robinson, who joined us for this evening's talk. He has said, thank you so much for the kind words. My excellent co-worker in the early days was Mary Broad. She actually undertook organizing the charter membership of the Friends. So hearing from John, and I know John well. John's been a real champion of the site. Even after leaving here as a site manager, he'd worked for the Museum Commission in other capacities, and even after retirement, has been a real champion for the site. He calls us every February 11th to remind us that it's the last day of blast. So we always look forward to our February 11th call from John, and usually he stops in to see us at least once a year. So like I said, John's always been a good champion and a real cheerleader for the site, and we appreciate his kindness always. So here is a question from Chip Brightbill, who also had a real impact on the site. He was the state senator to help us get the funding to actually do the exhibits that are over in the third bay. And his question is, since the production of charcoal was about half the effort, is there any possibility of doing a sign at Governor Dick to tie this work into the furnace? Well, I think that would actually be an interesting sign to do. I hadn't thought of that, actually. And by the way, Chip Brightbill was a charter member of the Friends as well. Yes. Just so you know. And so I guess we'd have to contact I'm trying to remember who owns that right now, but I guess we'd have to contact them and see if they'd be open to that, because I think we could do a really great sign for that. So we'll look into it.
All right. So Nancy Robinson asked a question. What style of architecture is the design of the furnace building? The windows are amazing, but they look like they'd be in a church.
So I think generally speaking, it's considered Gothic. Especially the windows are considered Gothic.
Yes, Gothic Revival.
I'm not an expert in architecture, though.
Well, Gothic Revival architecture was something that was really in style in the 1850s. It's something that you often see in church architecture, in especially New York State. You see it a lot in domestic architecture. You see a lot of houses of it, though you see that in Pennsylvania. Just New York State seems to have a lot more of it. But a Gothic Revival industrial building is somewhat of a rare bird. They do exist, but this, certainly is probably one of the better examples that is still extant. So, of course, this was directly across from the furnace owner's home. They had to look at it. So I think that, if you're going to look at a building, you might as well make it pretty. At least that was their thought. So, all right, this is a comment from Mike Trump, and this is in reference to the drawings that were seen in the Edward Patton photo with the steam engine. And he says Florence Starr Taylor was the artist of the works that could be seen in the steam engine room.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
So there we go. Another mystery solved. So we'll go from that one. There's a question here from Beth Wood. She noticed multiple pictures of train tracks. What did these do for the furnace?
Oh, okay. So if you were to look at pictures of the basically these train tracks that you see right there, they're going down to the ore pit. And there were different companies that had different railroad tracks going to the ore pit. There were separate tracks that went into different furnaces. So the train tracks that you'll see there, they're pretty much for going for ore. They're not transportation tracks.
Right. And I think also, Jim, we have a thought that, there is this tradition, both written and oral, that the right-hand section of the building that's there was used in the production of copper, when copper was being found in the mid and the late 19th century. That also may have been used for that, and also taking out pigs from the casting room. So you had rails kind of above the furnace, below the furnace, and then those are just internal tracks. And of course, then there are train tracks that took items to market. And that's the one thing about iron and iron ore; it's heavy. So if you can get it on something that makes it easier to get there, that certainly made the operation much more efficient. And also probably made it last a little longer than some of the other places that didn't have rail traffic, like a Hopewell furnace. So there is a question here from Terrence Boyer that says, Bayshore Boy Scout Camp has a story about a charcoal maker who was an escaped slave. I wonder if this was charcoal used at Cornwall. And I think that this is about a man who sometimes is referred to as Old Black Joe. And I think he was someone who was more for Union furnace, that was more in that kind of northern part of the county, if I remember that correctly. So I don't think that he was someone who was making charcoal here for Cornwall, but for one of the other iron operations, which I think initially was started by the Grubbs and then later became another Coleman property, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Robert Coleman owned it briefly, but didn't want it, and then got rid of it in a subsequent sale.
Okay.
But I'm not familiar with anybody, an enslaved person by the name of Black Joe.
I've seen there was a grad paper that was done about it, and I think there's even a slim volume that I've seen here locally that was about him. But I think that's who that is about. So thank you, Terrence, for that question. So Jim, that really, I believe, puts us at conclusion, because we've answered all the questions that came through. So let me go ahead and we'll end up here. So thank you everyone for attending. So thank you for joining us for this lecture. And of course, I especially want to thank Jim Polczynski for his presentation and for Kathy Donaldson for helping to organize our virtual talk. You rarely see Kathy if you've come to here as far as our talks, but she's always here behind the scenes. She's our second seater and was one of our volunteers of the year that was being recognized hopefully at the end of the month here, along with Mike Weber. So they both do really great work here at the furnace, and we're real lucky to have both of them. So I also want to thank the friends of the Cornwall Iron Furnace who sponsored this program. And as a reminder, if you or your business would like to sponsor a future lecture, please contact the site for further information. And of course, donations are always gladly accepted. So I hope that you can join us next month for our May 10th lecture on education in Lebanon County. And this is a continuation of a talk given by Jared and his father, Michael Blount. I believe they're going to really look at the 20th century education in Lebanon County, as that was the part we didn't get to the last time. And also the museum is doing an in-person event, Cast Iron Cooking, on May 14th. And I hope you can join us for that. So just a reminder that the museum is open Friday through Sunday. Please check our website for details and for tour information. So please stay safe and good night, everyone.